Hi, everybody, and welcome to your latest episode of All About Space with your host, Christophe Paget. So, last week was dedicated to Starship Integrated Flight Test number 3, and I trust you enjoyed that particular episode. Therefore, this week, you will be blessed with 2 weeks worth of news instead. So, I will provide you with news about the ISS, Sierra Space with its Dream Chasers, and the integrated flight test number 3 from SpaceX, of course. And I will conclude with the launches of the last 2 weeks. After 6 months at the ISS, the Crew 7 team was ready to depart. After the handover to the newly arrived Crew 8, Crew 7 has rejoined their Dragon capsule, undocked from the ISS and made a journey down to Earth, taking about 19 hours, going through Earth's atmosphere at 17.5 thousand miles an hour or 28,000 km an hour in a plasma-covered Dragon capsule to finally land on water in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida. The crew, Jasmine Mobelli from NASA, Andreas Morgensen from ESA, Satoshi Furukawa from JAXA, and Konstantin Borisov from Roscosmos is well and was on their way to the Kennedy Space Center for routine check and even home by now. Starship Integrated Flight Test or IFT-3 preparation was underway for the flight on March the 14th. It started with several stacking and unstacking of the Starship number 28 from the booster number 10 and removal of the launch mount scaffoldings along with aid devices used to install the booster to the launch mount. Starship number 29, which was situated next to the orbital launch mount of Booster 10 and Starship 28, was being tested with a spin prime test where they test the flow of liquid fuel through the engines with our technician. And then SpaceX treated us with the biggest deluge of their orbital launch mount I have ever seen, the biggest shower ever. That should round up the series of tests for the IFT number 3. Now, both boosters and Starship have been fitted with flight termination systems, and Starship number 28 have been put atop of its booster one last time, I hope. Starship 29 was then removed from Pack B and returned to the production site to clear the launch site for IFT 3. As you could see on the image, SpaceX has started again working at Kennedy Space Center on the orbital launch mount legs, which was paused for several months now, so we may need to focus our attention on Florida too. Nevertheless, the following week was occupied by the IFT-3 itself and its aftermath. I have discussed that IFT-3 in length on last week's episode, with a little summary later on in this video. Sierra Space has shown a picture of the second Dream Chaser named Reverence, currently in production along with its Shooting Star cargo module at their Dream factory in Colorado. The spacecraft will first be used to resupply the ISS and yet be completely reusable. The first Dream Chaser was tested at NASA's Armstrong Laboratory prior to being launched on the second Vulcan Centaur this year. The first Dream Chaser was then moved to the NASA In-Space Propulsion Facility for thermal vacuum testing. This will be its last testing phase in Ohio before it makes its way to NASA Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Ariane Group shared this week some pictures of what is going on right now at the European spaceport in French Guiana regarding the Ariane 6. So we could see on the pictures the mating of the upper and the core stages, and you could also see how the progress is being made regarding the side boosters. And all that in preparation for the maiden flight sometime in the summer. March 10th, SpaceX launched a Falcon 9 for his mission group 643 with 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board from his Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. The first stage flew for his 11th time and landed on the drone ship Just Read the Instructions in the Atlantic Ocean. The satellites were released on a circular low Earth orbit at 43° inclination and at an altitude of 530 km or 330 miles. The next day, SpaceX launched a Falcon 9 for his mission group 717 with 23 Starlink V2 mini satellites on board, one more satellite than usual, from his Space Launch Complex 4 East at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. The first stage flew for his 17th time and landed on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You in the Pacific Ocean. The satellites were released on the circular low Earth orbit at 53° inclination and at an altitude of 530 km or 330 miles. March 12th, it's the turn of Rocket Lab with an Electron launch from his Launch Complex 1B at Maya Peninsula in New Zealand for his mission Owl Night Long. The payload was a single 100 kg or 220 pounds Strix 3 synthetic aperture radar satellite for Synspective to build their new 30 satellite constellation for a 561 km or 350 miles Sun synchronous orbit at a 97° inclination. The first stage crashed in the Pacific Ocean and will not be recovered. March 13th, the new Kairos rocket from Space One took off for his maiden flight from Spaceport K2 in Japan. The rocket took off successfully, but a few hundred meters later exploded in midair. You could see the payload successfully released, but not at the right altitude. At the press conference, it was mentioned that the automatic flight termination system was triggered, which made the rocket explode as expected. However, the reason for triggering it is not yet known, as it is just happening. I will hopefully brief you in the coming weeks or month on the results of the investigation. Space is hard and Space One is facing it. On the same day, China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation launched a Long March 2C rocket with its third stage 1S from its Xichang Satellite Launch Center in China, with two spacecraft by the Chinese Academy of Science designed to perform communication and navigation testing from a distance retrograde orbit, or DRO for short, around the Moon with a third satellite in low Earth orbit. The upper stage, the 1S, did not accurately enter the intended orbit, and therefore the satellites were being deorbited. On the 14th of March, SpaceX launched a third integrated flight test Starship 28 atop of his Super Heavy booster number 10. The flight of the largest and most powerful ever built rocket has achieved many firsts in rocketry and a noticeable improvement from the IFT number 2. You will find on the top right corner of your screen the link for the full analysis of this flight in a previous episode. In summary, the first stage took off and did the perfect boost back, burn, and probably returned to the launch site in the Gulf of Mexico, but did not manage to slow down fast enough and reach the Gulf at a speed of 1100 km an hour or 700 miles an hour. As for the Starship number 28, it reached the desired orbit His payload bay door was tested, but to my mind did not perform as intended, and the vehicle has gone through the atmosphere re-entry at 26,000 km an hour or 16,000 miles an hour, but did not survive that temperature, which concluded these flight tests. More work is to be done by SpaceX, but we cannot deny the fact that IFT number 3 was a significant improvement from IFT number 2, so well done to SpaceX, and looking forward to the IFT number 4. And by the way, Glenn Shotwell said that this IFT number 4 may happen within 6 weeks. March 16th, SpaceX launched a Falcon 9 for his mission Group 644 with 23 Starlink V2 mini satellite on board from his Space Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The first stage flew for his 19th time and landed on the drone ship A Shortfall of Gravitas in the Atlantic Ocean. The satellites were released on a circular low Earth orbit at 43-degree inclination and at an altitude of 530 km or 330 miles. On the 19th of March, SpaceX launched 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites with his Falcon 9 for his mission Group 716 out of Pad 4 East at Vandenberg Space Force Base in California. The booster has flown for his 10th time and landed on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You, and the satellites were released at the usual orbit. March 20th, China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation launched a Long March 8 from his Wenchang Space Launch Site in China, with on board the Keqiao-2 relay satellite. So the Keqiao-2 will provide communication services for the Chang'e 4, 6, 7 and 8 lunar missions. The next day, China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation launched a Long March 2D, this time from his Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in China. On the 21st of March, Rocket Lab launched an Electron rocket for his mission Live and Let Fly, also known as NROL 123, out of his American pad, this time in Wallops Island in Virginia. On the same day, SpaceX launched a Falcon 9 with his 30th resupply mission to the ISS aboard his Dragon capsule, which has reflown for a 4th time for his mission CRS-2 SpaceX 30 out of his Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. The first stage landed back at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This week, I leave you with an image from the near-infrared camera of James Webb Space Telescope of star-forming region NGC 604 located in the Triangulum Galaxy, also known as M33, some 2.73 million light-years or 25.8 quintillion kilometer or 16 quintillion miles away from Earth. So NGC 604 is estimated to be around 3.5 million years old. The picture shows more than 200 of the hottest, most massive kinds of stars, all in the early stages of their lives. These types of stars are referred to as B and O types. So O-type stars can be over 100 times the mass of our own Sun. In bright red are tendrils and clumps of emission. The white and blue ghostly glow correspond to ionized hydrogen. The bright orange-colored streaks signify the presence of carbon-based molecules known as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. So this material plays an important role in the interstellar medium and the formation of stars and planets. So thank you very much for watching your episode of All About Space. I'm Christophe Paget, and see you next week. Goodbye.